The Untold History of Emperor Nero and Homosexuality. What if I told you? The most feared emperor in Rome once wore a wedding dress and called another man his husband. Yes, Emperor Nero. The madman, the murderer, the myth. But behind the flames of Rome and the bloodied stage of power, there's a secret history few dare to touch. His unapologetic embrace of homosexuality, performed not in the shadows, but under the marble arches of imperial palaces. This isn't just about scandal. It's about how Nero shattered every norm, rewrote the meaning of masculinity, and used his throne to turn taboo into spectacle. What time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where in the world this forbidden history is being uncovered. And if you're into the raw, uncomfortable, untamed side of the past, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, but it's about to get real. Let's step inside. You hear the hush before you see the crown. The palace, usually full of hard footsteps and urgent whispers, now simmers with something softer. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, soon called Nero, steps forward, not with the stomp of a warrior, but with the measured grace of someone who's learned how attention works. His robes trail behind him like a second skin. His gaze roams not over battle plans, but over people. Even now, at just 17, his throne feels more like a stage. Behind him, always near, always invisible, walks Agrippina the Younger. Her presence is quiet, but the control is loud. You don't need to see her speak to know he hears her voice in every decision. Rome believes it's watching a son take the crown. You notice something far more interesting: a mother placing the final piece in her lifelong sculpture. Nero doesn't reach for a sword. He reaches for style. He replaces maps with music and replaces old advisors with younger faces. The court grows more elegant. Conversation turns toward literature, not legislation. You begin to realize this isn't a boy uninterested in ruling. He's just interested in ruling differently. Where others built borders, Nero builds an image. He surrounds himself with men, athletes, singers, acrobats, not as warriors, but as inspiration. Their physiques are admired not for military use, but for beauty. Their forms become part of the emperor's collection, not as trophies, but as living art. His gaze lingers longer than Roman tradition prefers, but no one dares point it out. And even if they did, what law governs the preferences of an Emperor Seneca, the philosopher hired to guide him, tries to anchor Nero to something resembling order. Stoicism, restraint, virtue. The lessons echo down the marble halls, but seem to evaporate before reaching Nero's ears. You imagine the old tutor pacing slowly after lessons, wondering if wisdom can take root in a garden of indulgence. Nero doesn't hate the empire, he just finds it a little dull unless decorated. He renovates rooms not for functionality, but for mood. He stages music in the evenings, commissions statues by day. Not of gods or heroes, but of favored companions captured mid-motion. There's a fascination in him, not with the duties of the role, but with how the role makes him feel. As he grows into power, the line between governance and performance begins to blur. Courtiers adjust. Even the generals grow quieter, more graceful, as if trying not to disrupt the air around him. Rome's architecture remains unchanged, but inside the palace, a different kind of empire begins to unfold, an empire of aesthetic, of body of gaze. And this gaze, more than anything, becomes the axis of his world. Nero doesn't just desire beauty, he curates it. You see it in how he selects his companions, always choosing those with symmetrical faces, lithe frames, voices that carry well in the echo of marble halls. He doesn't dominate them in the way emperors are expected to. He admires them, observes them, elevates them. It's no surprise, then, that his court begins to resemble a living fresco. Men and boys, with polished skin, gold-threaded robes, and carefully oiled curls, walk the corridors not as servants, but as adornments. Their presence is not accidental. They are part of the atmosphere. He creates a reflection of what power looks like when it no longer needs to prove itself through violence. You begin to hear a new kind of whisper, less about politics, more about intimacy. Nero's fondness for certain attendants, the quiet gifts, the late-night poetry readings where only one listener remains. It's not scandalous yet, but it hums beneath the gold. And through it all, Nero smiles. Not a smirk, not a grin, a knowing smile. He sees the discomfort. He notices the glances, but he doesn't flinch. Because he isn't trying to be Rome's next great general. He's trying to become its most unforgettable presence. And just as the empire begins to blink beneath the weight of his curated beauty, you find yourself stepping into a banquet, not of politics, but of performance. The banquet hall is already perfumed when Nero arrives, floating more than walking his arms, raised, not in greeting, but in theatrical flourish. He wears robes that shimmer under torchlight eyes that search the room, not for allies or threats, but for an audience. This is not dinner. This is a performance, and the performance is himself. The senators gather like props perfectly placed, trained not to speak unless spoken to. They know the pattern well. Laughter too loud, wine too fast, music too long. At some point, Nero will recite a poem. At another, he will sing. The subject might be God's grief or the beauty of a well-shaped jawline. The details shift, but the rhythm remains. Pleasure first, governance never. You can see the discomfort behind the masks of protocol. Some guests keep their eyes firmly on their plates when a young attendant brushes too close to Nero. Others offer cautious applause when he pauses dramatically after a verse about divine love that sounds far more personal than mythical. And yet they stay. They clap. Because to do otherwise is to tempt the emperor's gaze, and that lately has become a dangerous thing. At his side stands Pythagoras, a freedman, elevated not by conquest or heritage, but by something far more volatile, affection. Nero refers to him not as an advisor or friend, but as his husband. And the court, already exhausted by the emperor's bold appetites, is forced to digest something even more daring, the sight of their ruler, dressed in bridal veil, reciting vows with full ceremonial gravity. The wedding is real in its ritual, if not in Roman law. Nero plays the bride, Pythagoras the groom, and the empire, trapped in its own decorum, does not object. It only watches. What should have been a scandal is instead a spectacle. And Nero, sensing this, leans deeper into the role. In public remarks, he refers to his marriage without shame or laughter. The jest, if it ever existed, has vanished. What remains is intention. The palace begins to shift its language. The poets follow. The staff learns which titles to use. Nero hasn't just blurred the lines, he's drawn new ones. But as quickly as attention lifts one name, it turns to another. A new figure arrives in Nero's orbit, Sporus. Younger, slighter, said to resemble Nero's deceased wife, Poppaea, whose death remains clouded in whispers. You watch as Nero's interest sharpens. Sporus does not charm with wit or power. He charms with resemblance. And resemblance in Nero's world is enough. You hear what happens next. Not immediately, not loudly, but it spreads. Sporus is taken, altered, prepared. His voice will not deepen. his features will not change. He is for all public purposes transformed. The emperor doesn't just dress him in gowns, he names him empress. He leads him through the city in bridal attire. If Nero once played the bride now, he becomes the groom, marrying a phantom of what he lost and remaking it in flesh. Sporus rarely speaks, at least not where others can hear. His expression is steady, not passive, not proud, just still. He walks beside Nero not like a partner, but like an offering. The court bows to him not out of respect, but confusion. And beneath every gesture, one question flickers unspoken. Where does the man end and the illusion begin? You can no longer separate theater from throne. Pythagoras fades into the background, his role complete. Sporus becomes the centerpiece. Rome, meanwhile, holds its tongue. Perhaps it doesn't matter anymore who Nero loves or why. What matters is that no one knows how to respond to a ruler who grieves through transformation, commands through aesthetics, and marries not out of alliance, but obsession. And as the procession of veiled weddings and candlelit serenades continues, the empire drifts still functional, still vast, but somehow hollow. Because no one dares admit the truth. Rome is being governed by a man who has turned his heartache into policy and his fantasies into law. And as the line between affection and authority blurs, so too does the distinction between a Roman feast and a slow descent into theater-cloaked chaos. You arrived late to one of Nero's evening gatherings, though in truth, there's no fixed time anymore. The party begins when he appears and ends when he grows tired of applause. That might be hours, or it might be days. The room is already thick with scent, cinnamon myrrh, and something more human, less nameable. Musicians play lyres from behind gauze curtains. Flower petals are scattered not just on the floor, but on bodies reclining between cushions, their limbs bare, their gazes heavy-lidded with sweet wine and deliberate ignorance. This is not a dinner. It's not even a ritual. It's something far less defined and far more dangerous. Nero presides over it all with effortless ease. He does not shout. He doesn't need to. Every servant moves with his breath. Every guest laughs when his smile flickers. When he gestures for the entertainment to begin, it isn't jugglers or acrobats. It's a choreographed spectacle of touch and suggestion. Bodies moving like whispers through scented air robes, falling not by accident, but instruction. You catch a senator, eyes wide, caught between fascination and horror. His cup trembles slightly as he sips, pretending not to notice a dancer who brushes against his shoulder. His lips smile. His soul, if still present, does not. It's not the content that disturbs him. It's the expectation. In Nero's world, refusal is its own kind of performance. One no one dares stage. The young guests, Nero's favorites, move like extensions of him. They touch when he touches. They laugh when he laughs. Some sit close enough to his side to share his wine directly, their mouths hovering over the same goblet. It is all perfectly arranged to look spontaneous. You wonder how many rehearsals it took. One particularly lavish night, you find yourself seated near the back of the chamber, close enough to observe, but far enough to be forgotten. A slave pours wine into your goblet, though your thirst left an hour ago. You try not to stare when two attendants begin acting out a myth. Apollo and Hyacinthus, you think, but without any pretense of subtlety. Nero watches intently, head tilted, as if judging a sculpture. Behind you, someone murmurs a line that barely rises above the music. He wants the whole world to blush. It's said with both admiration and dread. There's a game Nero plays, though no one dares name it aloud. He will summon a guest noble, or servant, doesn't matter, and ask them to recite a poem, or remove a robe, or confess a secret. Sometimes it ends in applause, other times in quiet tears. You see one young man, too clean, too new to court, fumble a line in front of the emperor. The silence that follows is colder than any winter breeze. Later, he is gone. Not dead, just elsewhere. But in Rome, exile and erasure often arrive hand in hand. Even the senators, once so rigid in their discipline, have learned to bend. You catch one formerly stern now singing verses he likely forbade his grandchildren from learning. Another, stripped to the waist, pours wine down his own chest at Nero's, coaxing his eyes dull with resignation. Dignity here is not lost. It is discarded like a sandal, no longer fashionable. And yet the strangest part is how ordinary it begins to feel. The longer you stay, the more the gasps become nods. The more the shame becomes costume. It's not that Rome has changed. It's that those inside the palace have forgotten what it felt like to resist. The city outside whispers. Of course it does. Servants carry stories faster than chariots. What happens within these perfumed walls does not stay there. But the gossip isn't sharp anymore. It's soft, muted, as if everyone understands that naming the madness too plainly might invite it home. You watch Nero raise a cup high above his head, his robes slipping from one shoulder. He toasts not to the gods, not to Rome, but to pleasure itself. The room erupts in cheer. A moment later, two guests begin dancing, not for fun, but for judgment. Nero's eyes follow them like a painter assessing shadows. No one speaks of law anymore. No one asks who governs. Because this parade of bodies and breath, an orchestrated indulgence, is governance now. In the empire's most gilded halls, policy has been replaced with performance and duty replaced with spectacle. You realize something chilling. This isn't Nero escaping responsibility. This is his vision of ruling. And as the lyres continue, and the sandals fall, and the senators pretend, you can't help but ask yourself, how long can a state survive when truth becomes optional, and everyone agrees not to remember what came before? And as night fades into morning, without ceremony or pause, you watch Rome's most powerful men quietly retreat from the palace, their faces blank as tablets scraped clean. The show is over for now, but the silence they carry with them is heavier than the wine-stained robes clinging to their backs. You can almost hear the thoughts they dare not say aloud. Did that really happen? Did I really play along? By the time they arrive in the Senate chambers, they have adjusted their tunics, reassembled their expressions, and buried every blush beneath rhetoric. They speak of taxes, treaties, grain shipments. Not one word is uttered about the boy dressed as an empress. Not one mention of the emperor's toast to Aphrodite spoken while draped over the shoulder of a Greek actor half his age. These things do not happen, not officially. In imperial Rome, denial is a shared language, and yet their silence is not agreement, it is survival. You watch them carefully. Some fidget more than they used to. Some avoid eye contact with men they once debated. A few offer forced laughter at jokes that would have been punishable months ago. The halls of governance are no longer places of decision, but of rehearsal. Everyone is acting, and everyone knows it. Occasionally, a senator will test the edges of the illusion. They might raise a question about Nero's latest artistic project, or ask, with exaggerated politeness, whether the public funds are truly meant to cover another month-long theatrical festival. The questions are met not with answers, but with silence, or worse, smiles. No one crosses Nero twice. Not if they wish to be remembered with anything more than a fading statue and a footnote. It's not just Nero they fear, it's the uncertainty he brings. He is not a tyrant in the old sense. He does not storm the Senate with soldiers or demand divine worship from trembling tribunes. He changes the room by entering it. His unpredictability is more dangerous than any sword. One day, he rewards a poet with a villa for a single flattering line. The next, he has a former tutor exiled for speaking too plainly. The rules change with his mood, and his mood changes with the lighting. And so the senators adapt. They perfect the art of neutral phrases. They invent compliments that mean nothing. One even writes an ode comparing Nero's voice to the sound of springtime rain on marble. It is nonsense, but Nero quotes it at his next gathering. The senator is invited to stay after dinner. Outside the chambers, however, the whispers build. Rome's common folk know more than the Senate believes. They talk of Sporus, the empress, who speaks like a boy, but walks like a queen. They joke about the marriage to Pythagoras, though not loudly. In the taverns and bathhouses, you hear laughter with nervous edges. There's an unspoken understanding that the emperor's eccentricities are no longer private. They're public policy now. One merchant complains that the city's treasury has been drained not by war, but by wigs. Another claims his neighbor was arrested for mocking Nero's singing. You can't confirm it, but you believe it. Even the statues begin to change. Where once stood generals in hardened bronze, now rise youthful figures, with flowing curls and distant gazes. Nero commissions likenesses of himself as Apollo, as Dionysus, as something between the two. The message is clear. Rome is not ruled by a man, but by a mood, a myth, a shape-shifting reflection of its ruler's inner world. A few senators try to speak privately among themselves, but the walls of the palace have grown ears. Informers sit quietly, drink quietly, listen closely. One senator disappears after suggesting Rome needs more marble, fewer musicians. Another retires early, citing illness, though you saw him in perfect health the day before. And yet, no one revolts. No daggers are drawn in back rooms. Not yet, because Rome is still fed. The games still happen. The baths are still warm. The chaos is dressed well, and so long as it arrives with music and honeyed wine, most will accept it, for now. You begin to understand the genius of it. Nero doesn't suppress rebellion. He seduces it into silence. He wraps scandal in silk drips, power and perfume, and makes every insult sound like poetry. He doesn't rule through fear alone, he rules through fatigue. The kind that makes even the boldest senator think twice before speaking first. And so they wait, in silence, in complicity, in fear that looks a lot like respect. And as the courtiers rehearse their restraint and the Senate swallows its spine, the city beyond the marble fades into soft unrest. The people speak in riddles now. They don't name names. They mention the singer in the palace or the woman with a beard. You pass a butcher who jokes that Rome has 2 empresses and no emperor. No one laughs too loudly. That's the point. The laughter must be just enough to release tension, never enough to invite scrutiny. Nero's world has become a mirror maze, every reflection slightly warped, every exit an illusion. Inside the palace, he moves through gilded corridors draped with flowers, trailed by singers, eunuchs, and painted dancers. But outside, the empire watches him, like one watches a lightning storm, beautiful, erratic, and best viewed from a safe distance. What's most unsettling isn't what's whispered. It's how often it's whispered. You overhear one soldier mutter that the emperor now takes husbands and wives alike. A market woman claims she saw Sporus in the forum, dressed in purple, escorted like a queen. A baker swears his cousin was silenced for calling Nero theater in a crown. None of these stories can be confirmed. And yet, they all feel true. You feel it in the way people avoid the palace walls. You see it in how tribunes hold their tongues, even when asked direct questions about imperial spending. And you begin to notice something subtle but growing. Nero's identity is no longer just gossip, it's become a weapon. Not against him, but wielded by him. He uses the very rumors that should shame him as instruments of control. When a senator scoffs too loudly in private, Nero invites him to a performance front row, directly opposite Sporus crowned and silent draped in ivory. The senator says nothing. He returns to the Senate the next day with a sudden enthusiasm for the arts. It happens again and again. The more Rome whispers, the more Nero displays. He turns discomfort into theater disapproval, into applause. You see Sporus elevated not just in costume, but in ceremony. He's escorted into temples, seated beside magistrates offered salutations normally reserved for imperial consorts. The crowd does not cheer, but it bows. And this is what makes it so terrifyingly effective. Nero doesn't need the empire to believe his illusions, only to repeat them. Over time, those who resist become isolated. Those who comply gain favor. And those who dare not speak either way dissolve into the silence that hangs over Rome like morning mist. Sporus, for his part, no longer flinches. If he once hesitated under the weight of his transformation, it no longer shows. He walks with the detachment of someone who has become more idea than individual. You wonder if he thinks about who he was, or if that memory has been buried beneath veils, incense, and expectation. At one imperial feast, smaller than the others, more private, you see Nero rise and raise a cup to beauty without definition. The room falls still. He gestures toward Sporus and adds, "Not all queens are born. Some are chosen." The applause begins slowly, then gains speed. Like a storm, people are pretending is a breeze. And perhaps that's the genius of it. Nero has redefined scandal as sophistication. He wears his mockery like perfume, strong, heady, unavoidable. Where other rulers would apologize, he performs. Where others would hide, he celebrates. Even his excesses become policy. Even his secrets become decoration. But outside the palace gates, you begin to notice fewer smiles. Grain shipments are delayed. Taxes stretch. A fire breaks out in the poorer districts, just a small one, they say. It's quickly controlled, they assure. But the smoke lingers in the air for days, and with it something else, suspicion. The people begin to grumble, not yet against the emperor's behavior, but against the consequences of his distractions. Bread costs more. Water arrives slower. Statues are cleaned daily, but streets fill with waste. It's not rebellion, not yet. But it's the kind of discontent that grows like mold, quiet, spreading inevitable. And Nero. He composes a new song. He rehearses a new tragedy. He drapes himself in yet another persona and steps onto yet another stage. Because if Rome begins to slip, it won't be his performance that falters, it'll be the crowd that fails to clap. And just like that, the illusion begins to fray, not in a single dramatic moment, but in slow, splintering silence. The laughter grows hollow. The applause shortens. Even the most loyal poets begin to recycle metaphors. Something subtle, yet irreversible, is shifting in the atmosphere like smoke curling away from a dying fire. Nero doesn't see it yet, or perhaps he refuses to look. He's still performing, still composing, still hosting feasts with golden swans and perfumed fountains. But behind the wine, behind the silks, behind Sporus's jeweled silence, you sense it, the unraveling. You hear it first in the footsteps. Officers who once strode through the palace with practiced devotion now move with hesitation. Courtiers speak more softly in the corridors. Palace, once a key advisor, disappears from sight. Some say he retired. Others hint he was quietly pushed. The truth doesn't matter. What matters is that those who once hovered around Nero, like planets around a sun, have begun to drift. And in Rome, distance is often the first sign of betrayal. The provinces stir. In Gaul, in Hispania, even in Africa, governors begin whispering what no one dared say aloud for years, that Nero is not eternal, that Rome can outlast him, that perhaps it must. These aren't rebellions, not yet, but they're questions. And questions once spoken have a way of multiplying. And still, Nero clings to performance. When news reaches him of unrest in the legions, he doesn't call the Senate into urgent session. He doesn't summon his generals. He prepares a stage. He decides to sing, literally. In front of trembling aides and mortified ministers, he rehearses a tragic role, voice cracking, eyes gleaming. He thinks if he can control the sound, he can control the story. But outside the palace walls, the story writes itself. Rome catches fire, an inferno that swallows homes, temples, entire districts. It burns for days. When the smoke clears, the people want someone to blame. And though Nero offers bread shelter, even promises of reconstruction, the rumors spread faster than the flames ever did. He sang, they say. He watched it burn and strummed his lyre like a bored god. It doesn't matter whether it's true. It feels true. And that in politics is often worse. To prove his innocence, he builds a grand new palace on the ruins, the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. It gleams with marble and gems and artificial lakes. It is not an apology. It is a monument to indulgence. And for the first time, the people stop whispering and begin muttering aloud. This is not grief. This is mockery. The Senate stiffens. Not into defiance, not yet, but into distance. Nero senses it. His invitations are met with polite excuses. The flattery slows. He tries new costumes, new lovers, even newer songs. None of it works. The stage he built now echoes. He hosts a festival in his own honor. Attendance is required. Cheers are forced. Applause arrives like coughs. And then come the final cracks. Revolts rise in the provinces, not whispered, not hidden. The governor of Hispania declares open opposition. The armies begin to shift, and Rome waits. It watches. The city that once wept when Nero sang now closes its windows when his name is spoken. Even Sporus, still by his side, has grown ghost-like present, but faded like a dream too long remembered. Nero panics. He flees the palace, not like a god, but like a man wild-eyed and half-dressed. He seeks shelter in a villa on the outskirts surrounded by servants who no longer bow, only obey. There are no cheers now, only questions, and the silence of men deciding how to end a chapter. He hears the footsteps coming. The Senate has condemned him. The Praetorian Guard has turned. The empire he ruled through image, through scent, through song no longer sees him. He is not emperor. He is embarrassment. In his final moments, Nero paces the villa, clutching a dagger, asking those around him the question no one dares answer. Is this what it means to die? They stare. He pleads. And then, when no one steps forward to help, he does it himself. Just barely. You hear the last words pass his lips, not in triumph, not in defiance, but in disbelief. Qualis artifex perio. What an artist dies in me. And with that, the curtain finally falls. Not on a general, not on a builder, but on an actor who mistook empire for audience and applause for permanence. And after the stage collapses after Nero's final breath, dissolves into the hush of a garden no longer guarded, the question begins to ripple: what exactly just died? Was it a man, a myth, or something harder to name, something still echoing in the halls where laughter once bloomed like ivy across marble? His death leaves no clean ending. Rome doesn't weep. It exhales. The Senate, suddenly brave, declares him an enemy of the state. Statues fall not from weather, but from command. In marketplaces, coins bearing his image are scratched or melted. Nero the performer becomes Nero the shame. And yet, like a melody that clings to air long after the musician has gone, something of him lingers. Because here's the strange part: Rome tries to bury him in ridicule, but it cannot fully erase him. The crowds who once feared and adored him now retell his story like folklore. Children whisper about the mad emperor who sang as the city burned. Tavern goers reenact his marriage to a man to a boy, to no one at all. The details blur, the outlines warp, but the fascination deepens. It's no longer history, it's legend. You find his influence not just in memory, but in marble. The Golden House is looted, yes, but not destroyed. Its corridors are admired in secret, its design echoed in later palaces. Future emperors imitate parts of his aesthetic, but not his theater. They learn the lesson: never draw the spotlight too long. Never make the empire your audience, and never under any circumstance fall in love with your own performance. But even those who came after couldn't quite resist the pull. Caligula had madness. Commodus had delusion. Elagabalus, another emperor who blurred gender and ritual, would one day echo Nero's shadow. You start to wonder whether Nero was an outlier, or simply an early version of something Rome was destined to confront again and again. The truth is slippery. Some ancient sources call him monstrous, others misunderstood. Some blame his mother, some blame the artists. A few, with surprising boldness, blame Rome itself for building a system where a boy could be handed the world before he had the chance to know himself. And then there's Sporus. No one knows exactly what became of him. After Nero's death, he was passed between Roman elites like a cursed relic, eventually ordered to take his own life by a man who once pretended to love him. His story ends not with freedom, but with silence, just as it began. Pythagoras disappears even earlier from the record. Whether he lived long or vanished into anonymity, Rome no longer cared. The performance had moved on, the props discarded, and yet centuries later, when scholars dig through texts, they always stop when they reach Nero. Not because he ruled long or ruled well, but because he remains confusing, radiant, grotesque, and magnetic. A contradiction draped in robes, a cautionary tale that somehow refuses to be quiet. You realize then that history doesn't erase Nero. It keeps him on retainer, as a warning, as a puzzle, as a mirror. Because maybe he wasn't just Rome's emperor. Maybe he was its confession. You wake to darkness, not the gentle velvet kind that drapes the summer sky. This is the cold metallic black that feels like it's pressing against your skin. You're not in a modern house, of course. There's no central heating, no duvet stitched in polyester fluff, no electric blanket humming softly by your side. You're wrapped in furs that reek faintly of the animals they once belonged to. And the air that brushes your nose is so cold you half expect it to crack like glass. But you're alive. And that's no small victory when winter comes to the Northlands. Because you're a Viking, or at least living like one tonight, and surviving winter isn't about heroics, it's about cleverness. See, for all their pillaging, PR Vikings weren't dumb brutes. When the snow came down and the fjords froze over, they didn't muscle through it, shirtless and stoic. They layered, like onions. Or like that time you went camping and vastly underestimated Icelandic wind. One tunic wasn't enough, and neither was one skin. First, the underlayer. You pull on a tight-fitting linen shirt, soft if you're rich scratchy, if not, but always there to wick the sweat before it turns icy. Over that thick wool. It's not the itchy shrink-in-the-wash kind your grandmother once knitted. No, this wool is soaked in lanolin oily from the sheep that produced it, and it shrugs off water like it's got secrets to keep. Sometimes it's even woven with decorative bands. Just because it's practical doesn't mean it can't look good. Then come the skins. Deer reindeer sometimes even bear anything that kept the original owner alive through worse. They're heavy, they smell, but they trap body heat like nothing else. You tie them close at the wrists and ankles with leather thongs seal off the drafts, and suddenly it's not warm, but it's survivable. Your breath doesn't quite freeze midair anymore, and if you're lucky or high status, you add accessories. Fur-lined mittens, maybe a hood with wolf trim. Viking hoods weren't just pointy for style. That shape traps warm air. The colder it gets, the more you resemble a shaggy walking bundle of practical decisions. And that's good. Because fashion doesn't mean much when your eyelashes are crusted with ice. Your boots, oh, those matter more than anything. They're not sleek, not waterproof in the modern sense, but they're made of hide, sometimes doubled up with grass or wool stuffed inside. That's right. Vikings invented insoles made of hay. You walk on dried sedge packed into the toes, replacing it when it gets too sweaty or cold. Primitive, sure. But it works. Better than your old hiking boots did last February when you thought you'd brave the snowstorm for coffee. And here's a fun detail you might not have guessed. Viking clothing wasn't always brown and beige. Natural dyes from lichens roots. Even insects gave tunics earthy reds, greens, and golds. Not every Viking looked like they were dressed in a potato sack. You might be freezing, but at least you've got a pop of madder red on your cuffs. Still dressing, warm is only half the story. You're not just trying to stay warm in a moment, you're trying not to die overnight. That's a longer game, and it means preparing before nightfall. Dry your layers during the brief daylight. Never sleep in wet wool. The chill will suck you empty by dawn. You curl up tightly, knees to chest, because Vikings understood something we now call thermoregulation. The less surface area exposed, the less heat you lose. And if someone's nearby child partner elder, you press in close. Not romantic, not optional. Shared heat is shared survival. You close your eyes. Somewhere outside the longhouse, a wind howls across the snowdrifts. It sounds like a ghost, but you know better. It's just the wind, or so you hope, but you can't afford to check. Getting up means losing warmth you may never get back. You shift slightly under the hides, listening to your own breath already slowing, already adjusting to the cold. You think of tomorrow, when you'll do it all again, layer by layer, breath by breath. And somehow, you'll wake up, not because you're tough, but because you're clever, because you dress like you meant it. The air inside the longhouse is thick. Not warm exactly, just less cold than outside. You blink slowly in the smoky half-dark, adjusting to the flickering light of a low fire, glowing embers, half buried in ash. Your breath still puffs out in little clouds, but not as urgently. Not with the walls around you, holding back the worst of the wind. This place wasn't built to impress. It was built to cradle life through the kind of winters that freeze rivers solid and make trees explode from the cold. Long, low, and narrow, the house stretches like a wooden ship, turned upside-down beams arching overhead like ribs. There are no glass windows, no insulation, no gentle hum of a furnace. But you'd be surprised how well it works. Every surface seems to absorb and hoard heat timber, darkened by years of smoke, wool hangings along the walls, thick animal pelts draped wherever possible. Even the thatched roof has a job to do. Stuffed with turf or sod, it offers a bit more insulation than you'd expect from a bundle of sticks. And when snow piles on top, it doesn't weigh the roof down, it adds another layer of protection. Nature becomes your second roof, like icing that locks the warmth inside. You're not alone in here, not even close. Maybe 10, 20, even 30 people share this space. Families, elders, warriors, children, all huddled together. At first, it feels claustrophobic, but then you realize body heat. They're all heaters, little moving, breathing radiators who, despite their snoring or shifting or dream talking, keep the chill from creeping too deep into your bones. You find your place along the raised wooden platform that runs down either side of the room, the benches that serve as beds, seats, tables, and everything in between. Beneath them, storage, and maybe a few rats. But above, your place to sleep, eat, survive. The closer you are to the fire pit in the center aisle, the warmer you stay. Though that comes with a price ash in your nose, smoke in your eyes. Ah, yes, the smoke. You cough, gently already accustomed. There's no chimney here. Just a small smoke hole in the roof that sometimes works and often doesn't. But that smoke isn't just a flaw, it's a feature. It curls around the beams, seeps into the thatch, drives away insects, and helps preserve meat and wood alike. Your lungs complain, sure. But your winter stores, thank you. The fire itself is rarely allowed to die. Not unless something has gone terribly wrong. You feed it carefully, rationing wood, because trees are precious in these latitudes. You don't throw on logs like some forest baron. You coax it twigs, bark, bits of peat, or driftwood. You whisper warmth into existence. Now look at the walls. They may seem like planks hammered together in a hurry, but they're clever too. Sometimes filled with moss, or clay for extra insulation. Drafts still sneak in, of course. You feel them nipping at your ankles like mischievous spirits. But the walls hold. Year after year. Storm after storm. And here's the part that modern comfort never taught you. Warmth isn't always a matter of temperature. It's ritual. It's people packed close together, telling stories that distract from the ache in your toes. It's hands wrapped around a wooden bowl of stew hot enough to sting. It's dogs curled up at your feet, children stealing into your bedroll, the flicker of flames mirrored in a loved one's eyes. Remember that boy who sneered at Viking architecture in your high school textbook? Let him camp alone in the forest without a sleeping mat. Let him freeze his eyebrows off trying to go rustic. Meanwhile, you're here in a centuries-old heating system, powered by togetherness, soot, and survival instinct. And maybe, if you're lucky, there's a little warmth beyond the physical. Someone sings softly. A grandmother hums while mending a wool sock. A baby burbles from the warmth of its mother's chest. The firelight paints your world in copper and shadow. Outside, the snow howls. But in here, the longhouse breathes. You pull your blanket tighter shift against the creaking wood beneath you and feel the rough texture of fur against your skin. You don't need modern comforts. You just need a house that hugs you back. The night deepens. The longhouse hums with soft murmurs and the occasional rustle of someone shifting under a pile of skins. Your breath still steams, but you're not shivering. Not yet. And you know why the three silent guardians of Viking survival are already at work: fur fire and fermentation. Let's start with fur. You're swaddled in it, layers of hides piled thick across your legs and shoulders, all of it heavy and vaguely damp-smelling, but warmer than anything spun from cotton or synthetic threads. Some pelts are stitched into patchwork quilts, others simply draped like the last line of defense between your body and the creeping fingers of frost. But fur isn't just for sleeping. When you move around the house, or Odin forbid go outside, you throw it over your shoulders like a cloak. It rustles when you walk. It marks your presence like armor, only this time the battle is against cold, not blades. Now listen. You hear it, don't you? That low crackle, like an old man whispering to himself. The fire is still alive. Not blazing. Never that. Wood is rationed and flames are greedy, but coals glow quietly under a dome of ash. You know the trick. Bank the fire before sleep, tucking it in like a baby, so it burns slow and long. Maybe you added peat bricks earlier, dense and earthy, with a smell that sticks to your hair. Or bits of bone, even dried dung if you're desperate. Nothing is wasted. Heat is heat. Fire isn't just for warmth either. It's for food. And here in the thick of winter, food becomes heat in another way. You ladle yourself a bowl from the cauldron that never stops simmering. Everyone adds to it when they can: bits of meat grains, dried herbs, root vegetables softened by hours in the pot. It's less a meal and more a potion, thick with grease and calories, and it clings to the ribs like insulation from within. You sip it slowly. First, the broth scalding and oily. Then the chewy bits at the bottom, some turnip maybe, or the last shred of yesterday's lamb. Every bite is a prayer, answered every mouthful a delay of the cold's advance. You've heard stories of other places, other people starving in silence. But here you fight back with stew. And then comes the warmth you weren't expecting: fermentation. You reach for the horn passed around earlier. What's inside isn't wine, not in the way you know it. It's mead, honey wine, brewed in barrels, tucked near the fire, thick with sweetness and a gentle kick. Or maybe ale, sour and muddy, but strong enough to numb your fingers from the inside out. Alcohol in winter is dangerous, sure, but it's also comfort, and it's communal. Nobody drinks alone. The shared horn means shared laughter, shared stories, shared heat, emotional, if not physical. You laugh quietly now, remembering earlier when someone told a tale about a man who got so drunk he mistook a goat for his wife. It wasn't funny the first time you heard it, but now it keeps the dark at bay. There are other fermented things too. Sauerkraut, from barrels, tangy and crunchy. Skyr, a kind of Viking yogurt that's so sour it curls your tongue. Fermented fish that could peel paint from the rafters. But it all serves a purpose: gut health, calories, and something to chew when the world outside offers nothing but ice. Still, no matter what you eat or drink, there's one thing you never forget: how quickly the cold comes when the fire dies, when the belly empties, when the furs slip off your shoulder just a little too far. Survival here is never passive. You don't endure winter. You work through it, one layer, one bowl, one breath at a time. You shift under your pile again, adjusting the position of your body to where the warmth is densest. Maybe you tuck your feet under someone else's hips, or curl tighter into the hollow between two bodies. There's no shame in that. This is how Vikings lived. Heat by proximity, breath by intention, life by strategy. And just before sleep drags you down again, you take a last sip from the horn. Let the fire's glow imprint itself on the inside of your eyelids, and listen for the sound of another log being fed to the flames. It comes. Soft. Deliberate. Someone else is keeping watch tonight. You're wrapped in fur belly full of fire food dreams, floating on fermented breath. You may not be warm by modern standards, but you're warmer than the snowstorm outside. And you're still breathing. Something shifts in the darkness. A grunt, maybe. A soft snort. Then a warm gust of air brushes your foot from somewhere much lower than human height. You don't flinch. You know the sound. That's not a monster from the sagas, it's the cow. Yes, the cow. Not outside in a separate barn like in modern times. Not bundled in a red wooden stable with hay and painted doors. No, she's inside, with you. And she's not alone. There's a goat too. Probably two. A pig snoring like a dying bellows. Maybe a few chickens clustered near the hearthstones, pretending to be invisible. Welcome to the other half of the Viking heating system, livestock as central heating. It sounds absurd at first, but then you feel it. The quiet warmth that builds over time, not from fire, but from breath, from mass, from life itself. A full-grown cow produces an astonishing amount of heat just by existing. Her body radiates it like a walking hearthstone. And in winter, that heat is not just useful, it's sacred. You shift slightly, your bedding pressed up against the partition that separates people from animals, if such a thing can really be called a wall. Sometimes it's a plank, other times a woven fence. Usually, it's just a general understanding. Humans on this side, beasts on that side. But the warmth ignores borders. It wafts over in invisible waves, settles into your bones, and softens the night. The animals, for their part, don't seem to mind. They've grown used to sharing space. They huddle together, in their corner hooves, clicking softly on packed earth steam, rising from their nostrils like tiny weather systems. They chew, they shuffle, they mutter in low tones. Only other animals understand. Sometimes they stink. Okay, often they stink. But when it's 20 outside and your fingers have turned white, you stop caring about the smell of goat. And here's the awkward truth you never read in textbooks. Yes, you probably do step in something unpleasant now and then. The floor is packed dirt, maybe with a layer of straw. The pigs are not trained to use a designated latrine. But winter survival is not about pristine cleanliness. It's about heat, and heat comes with mess. Besides, a little animal waste dried by fire becomes extra fuel. Gross, sure, but practical. Always practical. The animals are part of your life cycle. In the summer, they feed you. In the winter, they warm you. They are not tools, they are co-survivors. And when one dies, you don't just lose meat. You lose a member of the heat circle. You feel the cold creeping in to take its place. You remember earlier in the evening how the children had been playing near the pig, tossing straw and laughing when it snorted. No one scolded them. The pig is part of the family. Not in a sentimental Disney way, but in the deeply Viking sense that every creature under this roof has earned its keep. Sometimes at night, you even hear them dreaming. Soft sounds in the dark. A hoof twitch. a bleat that turns into a sigh. And it's oddly comforting. The longhouse becomes more than a shelter. It's a shared organism. A breathing, snorting, half-human, half-animal body designed to outlive the freeze. Even your clothes smell faintly of the beasts. The fur you wear still carries traces of its old owner. Your boots were once wrapped around a reindeer's ankles. Your blanket used to walk. And that closeness, strange as it seems, becomes a kind of intimacy. You wear warmth with history. Outside, wolves may circle. But inside, the cow shifts again, curling her body slightly. She doesn't know she's keeping you alive, but she is. Just by being here. Just by being warm. You adjust your position once more, grateful for the uneven floor that lets heat pool around the animal corner. Maybe tomorrow, you'll help brush the ice off their backs. Or you'll scrape the straw and lay down new bedding. Not because it's chore time, but because they'll do the same for you, in their own quiet four-legged way. For now, you close your eyes, your body somewhere between fire and fur, and smile faintly at the thought that of all things, it's a pig's sleepy breath that's keeping your toes from freezing off. You smell it before you open your eyes. A dense, savory scent that clings to the rafters, wrapping around the edges of your dreams. Something is simmering again. Of course it is. The cauldron never rests, not in this season. It's not just about hunger. It's about warmth. And that boiling pot in the center of the longhouse is as much a weapon against the cold as any fire or fur. You sit up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness of a body half frozen in sleep. Your joints crack like old wood. Your breath still fogs the air, but the scent of stew promises comfort. Even in the bleakest hour before dawn, there's heat in that bubbling pot. And more than just calories. Today's stew is thicker than usual. Someone added more barley, maybe even a bit of fat scraped from a smoked haunch. There might be dried peas, root vegetables that have been soaking all night, and shreds of salted meat that soften after hours of boiling. This isn't just food. This is insulation in edible form. The kind that lines your stomach and slows the winter from creeping into your bones. You scoop it with a wooden spoon, careful not to spill. The broth hisses as it touches the cold edge of the bowl. You blow on its steam, curling up into your face. Then you taste it, and it's like swallowing fire made gentle. Thick, greasy, slightly sour, maybe too much garlic, but it fills you. Not in the way a feast does, but in the way a small fire warms a cave. There's an art to this kind of cooking. Not recipes Vikings didn't have cookbooks, but intuition. You know when to add a splash of ale to sweeten the pot, when to throw in dried mushrooms from the roof beams, when to risk using the last of the onions. Every decision is calculated against the question, will we survive another day? You glance at the pot and smile. It's blackened with soot, its handles warped from years of service. The bottom is never fully clean because that's where the real flavor lives. Burnt-on history from 1,000 meals scraped and stirred into something new each day. Some call it a cauldron. You call it the hearth's heart. And here's something that might surprise you. It's not just about hot food. It's about wet food. Water is life in the cold. Dehydration kills faster than hunger. And in winter, you don't feel thirst the same way. So the stew pulls double duty. It feeds you and hydrates you one slurp at a time. You remember last week, someone tried to live off dry bread and jerky for 2 days. They nearly fainted from cold and didn't understand why, until they drank a bowl of soup. Then their color came back, because liquid heat moves faster, reaches deeper, And then there's bone broth. Oh, the magic of it. Boiled for hours, even days, if the fire cooperates. Bones of oxen, fish, pigs, anything with marrow. You don't waste bones. You extract them. Every drop of collagen, every trace of oil pulled out by time and flame. It's rich, milky, strange, but it works. Your hands stop shaking. Your lips stop splitting. You feel something come alive again inside you. Some nights they thicken the stew into a porridge. Add grains until the spoon stands straight up. It's almost laughably dense. More like food mortar than soup. But when the wind outside howls like the dead, and the stars blink like frostbitten eyes, that porridge becomes a blanket for your guts. Others toss in dried seaweed, bits of dried fish, pickled cabbage. Not because it tastes good, though sometimes it does, but because it fills space. Space means time. Time means survival. You glance around. Others are eating too, quiet, focused, reverent in that sleepy way winter demands. There are no feasts here, no second helpings unless someone goes without. But no one complains, because the stew means something. It's shared. It's communal. It says, we're still here. And when your spoon scrapes the bottom of your bowl, it says you've got another day in you. You lean back. The fire pops softly. The animals murmur. And in your belly, that stew becomes something more than food. It becomes armor. The kind you don't wear, but carry deep inside. You close your eyes again, steam still rising around your face, and let the warmth sink down through the marrow of your being. Soup, in the end, is the simplest magic. And for a Viking, it's the most dependable spell against the dark. You've stopped trusting your fingers. They don't always report back right away when you wiggle them. Sometimes they just hesitate or go numb without asking. That's when you know it's getting serious. Not the romantic kind of cold with snowflakes and soft scarves, but the kind that eats slowly from the outside in. That's why even now, as you press your hands under your armpits for warmth, your eyes scan the room for signs. Not just of cold, but of danger. Because out here in the Viking world, the difference between chilly and dead is about 15 minutes and one bad decision. The truth is, everyone here learns early. Children toddle through frost before they speak. Their first lessons are not the alphabet or God's names, they're survival tricks. Don't touch metal with wet fingers. Don't drink too fast when you come in from the cold. Don't sleep too long after your clothes get wet. You remember watching a boy, barely 7, wring out his wool mittens and hang them over the hearth without anyone telling him to. He'd fallen into a snowbank, laughed about it, knew exactly what to do next. There's no time to be delicate. Cold doesn't care how old you are. And adults, they develop instincts so fine-tuned, they make modern wilderness guides look like amateurs. You learn to feel when frostbite is flirting with your toes, or when your breath changes rhythm, because your body is hoarding warmth. You listen to your own heartbeat, like it's an animal you have to train. You pay attention when someone starts slurring their words, not because they're drunk, but because the cold is slowing their brain. It happens fast. That's what makes it dangerous. One moment, you're out collecting firewood, puffing steam, and swinging an axe. The next, your sweat freezes under your tunic, and suddenly, your body is stealing heat from itself. That's the worst part. The betrayal from within. So you learn to move deliberately. No sudden bursts of effort. No sprinting, unless it's life or death. You keep your breathing steady, your hands gloved, your wool dry. You eat fat in the morning, You sip warm broth before stepping out. Everything you do is a small act of insurance. And still there are the moments. That creeping sensation when your nose doesn't hurt anymore because it's gone numb. The tingling in your fingers that's not warming up, but shutting down. You look for color, pale gray, waxy white purples, like bruises blooming where they shouldn't. You don't just survive winter. You stalk it, watch it, anticipate its moves, like a wolf watching a rival pack. You remember the old man who used to test his fingers every morning by tying knots in a strip of leather. He said, "When I can't tie this, I don't go outside." He died at 63. In Viking terms, that's a full life, especially for someone who battled winter head-on every year. And then there's the snowblindness. On the few bright days when the sun reflects off miles of white, your eyes sting and squint and water until you see halos. Some Vikings darken their eyes with soot primitive sunglasses. Others just close their eyes more and walk by memory. Because even light becomes a weapon in the cold. But here's what no one tells you: there's beauty in it too. Not the postcard kind, but the fierce, earned kind. The kind that glimmers off icicles like crystal daggers. The kind that makes you laugh out loud when your spit freezes before it hits the ground. You feel alive, not in spite of the cold, but because of it. You step outside briefly, just to check the weather. Your boots crunch on the packed snow. The wind slices across your cheek like it's sharpening you. But your body knows this. You tuck your chin, pull your hood, clench your fists inside the mittens, and breathe slow. You're not afraid. You're ready. Because you've learned to listen. Not to calendars or forecasts, but to skin, breath, wool, wind. The old signals, the ones that whisper, "You've got one more day in you." You step back inside. Someone passes you a bowl. Someone else adjusts the fire. And your fingers, they come back to life. Wool. You used to think it was just scratchy. Something your grandmother knitted into lumpy scarves that made your neck itch. But here, in this world of bone-deep frost and breath that fogs in front of your face, wool becomes something else entirely. Not clothing, not fashion, technology. You run your fingers across your sleeve. It's dense, coarse, woven tight with skill passed down through generations. This isn't modern merino from a shiny catalog. This is lanolin-rich, sheep-scented, water-resistant armor. It's why you're not shivering right now. Why your sweat isn't killing you the second it cools. Wool breathes. Wool insulates. Wool remembers. They say a good wool tunic is worth more than a silver arm ring in winter. You believe it. You've worn this one for 2 winters already. Repaired at the shoulder with gut thread. Stained from stew spills and singed at the cuff. But it still works. It still works. You'd trade a dozen coins for a garment that keeps your chest from icing over at midnight. And it's not just the tunic. You're wrapped in wool from head to toe leggings, cross-laced with bands, to keep them snug, woven socks inside hide boots, a woolen hood that traps warm breath around your ears. Every inch of you is swaddled in fibers that know how to fight cold better than you do. The Vikings didn't just stumble into this. They engineered it. Spinning wool wasn't women's work, it was survival work. Spindles twirled beside fires all year long. Weaving wasn't just a domestic chore, it was strategic infrastructure. You've seen the loom's massive wooden frames, strung with taut vertical threads like harp strings. Weft by weft warmth is built with patience and planning. And the lanolin, that's the secret sauce. Viking wool wasn't scrubbed clean like today's textiles. The natural oil stayed in giving it that slightly greasy feel. That oil repels moisture. You've seen it in action. Watch the snow land on your sleeve and slide off without soaking in. That's not luck. That's chemistry. Ancient, animal-born, and perfect. Even the colors served a purpose. Dark wool absorbs more heat. A black or deep brown tunic gives you a fighting chance on a cloudy afternoon. The dyes come from plants, bark lichens, even iron rust. Sometimes it's muted, sometimes rich. A dash of madder red, a streak of woad blue. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because color can lift spirits. And spirits matter when winter tries to grind you down. Then there's felting. You hadn't heard the term before you lived this way. But now you understand the genius. Take wool apply, heat moisture, and pressure. What do you get? A dense mat that blocks wind like a wall. Vikings used felted wool in boots, hats, sometimes even layered under cloaks. It's heavy. It's awkward, but it works. You can sit on snow without your backside freezing off. That's innovation. You tug at your hood, pulling it lower. The wind has picked up again. You're indoors, but drafts snake in through the cracks. Doesn't matter. Your wool knows its job. It traps body heat, creates little pockets of air that buffer against the chill. You are quite literally wearing insulation. You remember when you first put on a damp wool cloak, expecting misery. But instead of freezing, it stayed warm. Because wool, even wet, holds heat. No synthetic has ever quite matched it. The fibers curl and cling and create friction. It's not glamorous. It's reliable. You glance around the longhouse. Everyone is wrapped in some version of it. Children curled in woolen blankets. Elders in long robes belted at the waist. Even the dog near the fire sleeps on a mat spun from leftover tufts. Wool is everywhere. It's the unsung hero of Viking winter. And here's the strangest part: you start to love it. The smell, the scratch, the familiarity. Like a second skin, built stitch by hands that understood cold like an enemy they'd face for life. Hands that spun thread, knowing it might one day stand between life and death. You press your palms against your thighs, feeling the warmth trapped in the fabric. Outside, the snow rages, but inside this cocoon of memory and fiber, you're safe. Not invincible, but protected. You exhale slowly, steam rising around your cheeks. The wool clings to your arms, a silent promise we've done this before, and we'll do it again. The river is frozen solid now. It groans under its own weight, cracking in long, echoing sighs, like a god rolling over in sleep. You step carefully across it, the ice beneath your boots, glittering with hoarfrost, thick enough to hold a horse, but still whispering threats beneath the silence. You've learned to read the signs, tiny bubbles trapped under the surface, dark patches that mean danger, the sound of your own steps, registering a little too loud. But you walk anyway, because winter doesn't mean stillness. It means adaptation. And if there's one thing Vikings are good at besides surviving on soup and side-eyeing their pigs, it's using the cold to move. See, the ice isn't just an obstacle, it's a highway. Rivers that were treacherous in summer become clean, direct roads in winter. What once had to be road becomes something you glide across if you've got the tools. And you do. Because tucked under your bench, back in the longhouse, there's a pair of wooden skis. They're not curved and polished like the ones in fancy ski resorts. No sponsors, no shiny boots, no chairlifts. Just flat planks of pine curved at the tip strapped to your boots with rawhide cords. But they work. You strap them on, grab your pole, a single pole mind you, and push off across the snow. You fly. Well, sort of. You shuffle with purpose, gaining speed as your muscles remember the rhythm. Skiing for a Viking isn't sport. It's hunting. It's communication. It's reaching the next settlement before a storm hits. It's covering 15 miles in half the time it would take on foot. And when every hour outside drains the heat from your bones, speed matters. Snowshoes work too wide, circular frames laced with gut or hide that let you walk atop powder instead of sinking into it. They look clumsy, but they save energy. You've worn them before, trudged through drifts waist high, and thanked the ancestors for the invention. Without them, you'd still be digging yourself out of that snowbank from 2 years ago. Sleds are another trick. Pulled by horses, oxen, or just a few strong arms, they become winter wagons. You load them with fish firewood sick relatives. Once you help drag a whole deer back from a hunting trip across 15 miles of hard-packed snow. Took all day, but the sled made it possible. Your shoulders still ache just thinking about it, but your stomach remembers the roast. The cold forces invention. You can't sit still. Your body stiffens. Your mind dulls. But move, slide, glide, drag, ride, and suddenly winter becomes a season of cleverness. You look at the world and think, what else can I use birch bark for kindling? Pine sap for sealing cracks. Ice blocks to build temporary windbreaks on hunts. You even learned how to dig a snow pit, to sleep in insulation made from the enemy itself. And when the sun does shine, bouncing blinding off every surface, you don't curse it. You tilt your face upward and absorb what little heat it gives. You walk straighter cheeks raw but defiant. Because you're doing it, you're using winter, outwitting it, turning it into an ally even as it snarls around the edges. You remember the old tale of the man who tied fish to his boots and slid across the lake like a madman. Everyone laughed until he got home twice as fast as the others. That's the Viking way, practicality first, pride later. If you look ridiculous but survive, you've already won. The wind picks up. You adjust your scarf, tug your mittens tighter, and keep moving. Every step, every slide, every grunt of effort keeps your blood warm. That's the irony of it all. Sometimes the only way to stay warm is to keep going. You can't outrun the cold, but you can stay just ahead of it. A breath, a heartbeat, a snowshoe ahead. You pass the riverbank and see animal tracks, fox maybe, or something bigger. You pause, scan the trees. Nothing moves, but your fingers twitch towards your knife anyway. Not because you want to fight, but because winter is not a time to be caught unprepared. And yet even in the harshest moments there's beauty. The hush of snow under skis. The sharp scent of pine bark warming in the sun. The strange joy of seeing your own breath spiral like smoke in the air. You grin, teeth chattering. The cold may be cruel, but it's honest, and that counts for something. You reach the edge of the trees, turn back toward the longhouse, and see the smoke rising from its roof. A sign of life. A sign that the fire is still burning. You pick up your pace skis, scraping rhythmically, lungs pulling in air so cold it almost sings. Frozen rivers didn't stop you. They taught you to move better, faster, smarter. And in a world where the weather wants you dead by default, that's more than survival. That's victory. Back inside the longhouse, the light is dimmer now. The fire has shrunk to a nest of embers, glowing like coals buried in the belly of the world. The air is smoky still, but not silent. Someone is whispering near the hearth, not to another person, but to the flames themselves. You pause, listening, not quite sure if it's a prayer or a spell. You've heard these murmurs before. In winter, voices soften. People talk less, but believe more. Because when the nights stretch on, like a punishment, and the frost keeps pushing against the walls, even the most practical soul starts to wonder, what if it's not just weather? The Vikings didn't separate survival from the sacred. Cold wasn't just cold, it was a presence, a punishment, a warning, maybe even a being in its own right. They had names for it. Skadi, the goddess of winter, was both beautiful and merciless. She hunted in the snow, her bow strung tight, her face white as ice. She didn't hate you. She just didn't care if you lived. And that's the danger. The cold feels personal even when it isn't. So you respect it. You bow to it sometimes, literally. When the first snow falls, someone might offer a cup of ale to the gods. When someone dies from exposure, the old women mutter charms under their breath, warding off spirits that feed on heat. You used to roll your eyes, but now you've seen the way frost creeps across a window like fingers, the way icicles form perfect daggers above the eaves, silent and waiting, the way your own shadow sometimes feels. Wrong on moonlit snow. So you listen when the elder tells you not to whistle after dark. You don't laugh when someone ties a red ribbon to a baby's cradle to keep the cold spirits from sniffing around. You nod when a man pours a drop of broth into the fire just in case the ancestors are hungry. It's not about superstition. It's about story. And in winter, stories are insulation. They fill the gaps that no wool can reach. They explain what science doesn't, why one man freezes, while another dressed the same survives, why your goat stopped eating on the solstice, why the snow looks blood red at dawn. You pull your blanket closer. You remember a dream you had last night of a woman in white fur, walking across a lake that cracked with every step but never broke. Her eyes were empty, her breath curled backward. She didn't speak, but you woke up sweating despite the cold. You didn't tell anyone. Dreams like that are private currency here. The fire pops. Someone stirs the pot. A child sneezes. The spell breaks, but only slightly. Symbols are everywhere. Knots carved into the beams to keep out evil. A piece of iron buried beneath the threshold. A carved face, half smiling, half frowning, mounted near the door to confuse spirits who don't like indecision. You're told not to sweep after dark, not to speak the names of the drowned in winter, not to sleep with your feet pointing toward the entrance unless you want to invite something in. These aren't rules, they're anchors, ways to hold on to order when the sky forgets to lighten and the wind screams without reason. When you've lost 3 chickens to something you never saw, and a neighbor wakes up with frostbitten fingers, despite sleeping next to the fire. Even the aurora borealis, those shimmering green ghosts that dance across the sky, aren't just lights. They're spirits. They're omens. Some say they're the armor of dead warriors. Others say they're a warning. Either way, no one whistles when they're overhead. You just watch and wonder if they're watching back. So you sit a little straighter now. You hum softly when you stir the stew. You trace invisible runes on your thigh while you wait for the meat to fall off the bone. Not because you believe in magic, but because the cold might. The door creaks open, and a gust of wind swirls and scattering ash across the floor like gray snow. It's someone returning late, maybe from the outhouse, maybe from checking the livestock. They stamp their boots, clap their gloved hands, and mutter a curse at the night. Then they close the door and just pause. You watch them linger there, letting their body thaw one breath at a time. The silence returns, but it's not empty. It's earned. This is how Viking winters end, not with a shout, but with a stillness that hums. Because eventually the struggle fades into routine, and the cold becomes a backdrop, not a threat. You learn to move around it, sleep inside it, laugh in spite of it. And when all else fails, you come to the fire. You come to the hall, not just for heat, but for each other. The longhouse isn't merely a structure. It's a season, a state of mind. When the world outside is trying to erase you, the hall remembers who you are. You are not your frostbitten toes, or your cracked lips, or your aching joints. You're part of something older and warmer than the cold knows how to fight. You feel it as you sit on the bench, wrapped in your layered cloak, surrounded by the quiet murmur of survival. The fire is low now, but it still breathes. A few logs glow red, their insides pulsing like the heart of a sleeping giant. Around it, your people gather, not just to warm their hands, but to be reminded. Stories begin softly. Someone clears their throat and launches into a saga you've heard a dozen times. But it doesn't matter. The cadence is familiar. The hero's journey winds through snowdrifts and sword fights. Everyone knows how it ends, but they listen anyway. Mouths half smiling, heads nodding, hearts remembering. Even the children hush. They curl under blankets, eyes wide, following the tale with the same reverence they give to food. Because this is food too for the soul, for the parts of you that get colder than flesh. Someone passes a carved cup, mead maybe, or just warm water with a slice of dried apple in it. Sweetness doesn't last long in winter, but when it appears, it's shared. No one drinks alone. No one is alone. You shift closer to the fire. Your knee brushes someone else's. They don't move away. Neither do you. Bodies touching, not romantically, not ceremonially, but in the oldest form of human closeness, survival by proximity. And outside the storm rages. Let it. Because inside this hall there is laughter. Quiet sometimes, brittle, but real. There's music, maybe just a bone flute, or someone humming a tune their grandmother sang during winters long dead. There is warmth, spilled across skin and wood and memory. You close your eyes and breathe it in. The smoke, the broth, the wool, the stories, the still beating heart of the Viking Hall, which doesn't just survive the cold, it defines it. The cold is out there. Always will be. But in here, you've found the counterspell. It's not a fire, not alone. It's the press of a shoulder, the steam from a bowl, the shape of a song passed down because no one wanted it to die, the rise and fall of breath shared among those who refuse to freeze, the way a child laughs even when their nose is red and running, the way someone reaches out and casually fixes your slipping hood. That's warmth. And when you finally lie back down, fur pulled to your chin, embers glowing behind your eyelids, you realize you're not just surviving winter. You've outlived it. Again. You don't need a wristwatch, a smartphone, or even a rooster. Not when the church bell knows exactly when you should wake up, work, pray, and sleep, and reminds you loudly every few hours. In the middle of a quiet medieval village, long before your eyes are open, the bell tower begins its sermon of sound. A deep, echoing clang bounces off timber walls and thatched roofs. It's not asking permission. It's announcing divine scheduling. This is how you keep time without a clock. You listen. Because the bell doesn't just mark the hour it tells you what to do. It calls you to Mass. It warns you of Vespers. It demands attention at terse sext, and none those strange medieval hours carved not by machines, but by monks' theology and habit. And if you're a commoner, you don't argue. You can't even read a sundial, let alone debate ecclesiastical timekeeping. The bell tower stands tall above the town like a nosy neighbor with perfect timing. It doesn't care if you're napping, baking, or praying too early. When it rings, you act. And strangely, it works. In a world without synchronized devices, the community still finds rhythm. The blacksmith hammers by the same schedule as the baker. The market closes on cue. Even the goats seem to respond to the ringing, or maybe they just pretend to out of fear of divine punishment. The bell itself is a marvel cast in bronze, huge and temperamental. To make it sound at the right time, someone has to climb a cold stone staircase sometimes in the dark and haul a thick rope until their back hurts. There's no snooze button. The bell ringer knows the order of daily offices better than the local priest. Miss a toll, and the village gossips will fill in the blanks. They'll assume sin scandal or worse laziness. It wasn't always this organized. In early medieval times, before bell towers rose like spiritual antennas, monasteries relied on their own internal methods. Someone staying awake, candle in hand, counting the hours by guesswork, or watching the stars crawl through stained glass. But once the mechanical bell clock came along in the 14th century, everything changed. Not everyone had one, of course. But when they did, oh, it was majestic. Gears, pulleys, clappers. A miracle of iron that rang with divine authority. Still outside of cities and cathedrals, the bell's authority rested on something simpler than machinery. It was about tradition. Generations of ears learning when it was time to pray, to work, to mourn. You didn't measure your day. You absorbed it through sound. The bell made sure you didn't forget that time belonged to God, not to you. Especially not if you were late for compline. Sometimes the bell's meaning shifted. A different tone might signal death. Another, an attack. You'd freeze in the middle of washing wool or threshing grain, listening for the emotion behind the metal. Panic or peace, joy or judgment. The bell was your medieval group chat, only louder, holier, and impossible to mute. And yes, time was holy. You couldn't separate the hour from the heavens. If you were lucky enough to live near a Benedictine monastery, their schedule crafted in strict adherence to Psalm 119 7 times a day, I praise you, became your schedule too. Their prayers were your hours, their bells, your guide. You might not understand Latin, but you knew when to kneel. Ever think about what that would feel like today? Imagine if, instead of phone alarms and calendar pings, your neighborhood rang an enormous bell every time it was time for lunch, or your shift or bedtime. Would you feel controlled or comforted? The medieval world rarely made that distinction. Routine was holy, disruption suspicious. Of course not, every bell tower was equal. In smaller villages, bells were sometimes hung from trees, simple beams, or wooden scaffolds. Still they rang. Still people followed. It wasn't about precision. It was about pattern. Time didn't need to be exact. It just needed to be heard. Even if no one owned a clock, everyone still owned a life ruled by hours, and those hours were announced by echoing bronze rippling across hills and forests like the voice of time itself. You might think this system is chaotic, but in its own way, it's incredibly efficient. The bell builds a shared rhythm. People start and stop together. There's less confusion, Fewer wandering souls wondering if it's too late to milk the cow or too early to walk to Mass. Time in the medieval village is collective. You don't keep your own. You share it. But even the bell has its limits, especially when your job is to wake before it rings. That job, of course, belongs to the monks, specifically the ones tasked with matins. You might think of monks as quiet, solemn men in robes. That's mostly true. But they're also human alarm clocks rising in total darkness to chant the first prayers of the day. Not sunrise, not even dawn. We're talking pitch black, middle of the night prayer. You shuffle through the stone corridors of the monastery, the air damp and cold even in summer. The walls breathe centuries. A single candle flickers ahead, held by the night watch, the one monk who doesn't get to sleep through this. He's been watching the stars, measuring time with an astrolabe, or more commonly, just a trained sense of almost 2 a.m. The human body, it turns out, can learn rhythm even better than a clock if it's trained for a few decades. Matins wasn't optional. If you're in a Benedictine monastery, it's the spiritual equivalent of clocking in. Even though your eyelids beg for rest, you chant psalms, read scripture, and try not to fall asleep mid-meal. It's dark, it's cold, it's barely life. And yet, it's your offering of time. Some monks had clever ways of keeping track without peeking outside. They used lucerne, a kind of oil lamp marked with notches or threads that would burn down at predictable rates. If the flame reached thread number 3, it was time for matins. No bell needed, just fire wax and a little trust. Later, mechanical clocks would show up in monasteries too, but ironically, monks weren't the first to adopt them. Cities got them first, because civic pride demanded that public squares ring louder than abbeys. But monks, they had something older than gears. They had vows, and vows don't care what time it is. They just whisper, get up, pray, repeat. There's something beautifully strange about the idea of hundreds of sleepy men across Europe, scattered in isolated stone buildings, all rising at nearly the same hour, guided by nothing more than ritual and habit. No emails, no calendar invites, just devotion that runs deeper than fatigue. And let's be honest, if you lived in a monastery, you didn't really own your time. It belonged to God. Every hour was divided with precision, a spiritual pie chart, prime terce, sex none, vespers compline. Matins just happened to be the slice that ruined your dreams. You could try sneaking in a nap afterward. Some monasteries allowed a return to bed after matins, and lauds depending on the season. But don't get comfortable. Prime another prayer hour was waiting just around the corner, usually with the sun. You'd barely close your eyes before the next bell yanked you back to your knees. Now, if you're thinking, why not just let people sleep and pray later? You're not wrong. But medieval life, especially monastic life, wasn't about comfort. It was about sacrifice. Time wasn't yours to hoard. It was a gift to give hour by hour, even if the hour in question came before roosters dared to crow. Here's a thought. If modern folks had to get up every night at 2 a.m. to chant in Latin under a leaky ceiling, how long would they last? A week a day. That bedtime notification on your phone would feel like a joke compared to a freezing bell tower, and the knowledge that Brother Walter will tattle if you skip lauds again. And yet this relentless schedule helped shape some of history's greatest minds. Think of Bede the Venerable, the 8th century monk, whose daily routine included midnight study and pre-dawn prayers. Or Hildegard of Bingen, whose visions and music were born from these sacred hours lived in the breathless space between sleep and service. It wasn't about efficiency. It was about eternity. By carving up time into holy pieces, the monks turned every moment into a prayer. And they did it long before the ticking clock arrived to tell the rest of us what time it was. Eventually, you get tired of bells and cold stone corridors. You want something simpler, something warm, something outside. So you step into the daylight and do what people have done for thousands of years. You look at your shadow, and suddenly, you're holding one of the oldest clocks in the world. Your body. In medieval times, the sun isn't just a source of light, it's a timekeeper. When it rises, so do you. When it vanishes behind the hills, so do your plans. Midday. That's when your shadow is shortest. Morning stretches it eastward like a lazy cat. Evening pulls it west until it disappears altogether. You don't need a watch when your feet and a patch of dirt will do, but you can get fancier if you want. Maybe you live near a manor or a monastery with a proper sundial, etched stone, aligned carefully calibrated with care. You know what that means. Someone somewhere spent a lot of time figuring out exactly where the sun lands in summer versus winter, and probably argued about it, loudly, with charts. Still, most people don't need the math. You just learn to feel the day through the sun's position. A farmer doesn't look at a dial. He looks at his shadow stretching across the plow. A milkmaid judges how long she has before curfew by the way the sunlight hits the barn wall. It's intuitive, yes, but incredibly precise once you know what to look for. You ever play that game as a kid, where you chase your shadow or try to step on someone else's? That playful instinct has a deep history, because in medieval times, your shadow wasn't just fun, it was functional. You could almost say it followed you and led you. Quite poetic, really. There were even portable sundials. Wealthy travelers might carry a ring dial, a small brass loop with a sliding hole. When sunlight passed through at the right angle, it marked the hour inside the ring, like a cosmic pocket watch. No batteries, just sky. The downside, clouds. Medieval weather isn't known for its kindness, especially in Northern Europe. Overcast skies meant guesses. Rain meant full improvisation. You could go days without knowing the exact hour, but no one panicked. There's a sort of collective shrug built into medieval timekeeping. It's probably around terse. We'll meet at sunset if the storm clears. And somehow, people made it work. Of course, if you're building a cathedral or defending a castle, you need a little more precision. That's when you bring in the stonemason or the astronomer. They'll chart solar paths, track equinoxes, and place sundials in spots where sunlight always falls cleanly at noon. These become community references, anchors in time, public clocks made of sun and stone. Want a modern comparison? Think of a town that uses a factory whistle or a school bell to signal lunch break. You may not check your watch, but when that sound echoes, you move. The sundial is quieter, but just as commanding. When it says noon, everyone believes it, even if it's off by 10 minutes in winter. And then there's the way the sun marks seasons. Longer days mean planting. Shorter ones mean butchering, preserving huddling. You don't need a calendar to know when summer's peaking or when the solstice arrives. You feel it in your bones, and you see it in your shadow's dance across familiar walls. Some towns even used architectural features for solar alignment. Narrow alleyways that flood with light only at midsummer. Church windows that catch the dawn perfectly on a saint's feast day. These aren't accidents. They're stone-built calendars blending art with astronomy. Now here's a fun thought. Have you ever noticed how skyscrapers cast shadows that slide across entire city blocks? Imagine reading time from that. Or better yet, try to use your office window glare to guess the hour. You're not so different from a medieval mason, squinting up at the sky and muttering, "Is it Vespers yet?" What's remarkable is how embedded this system becomes. You don't just learn it, you live it. You know where the sun should be by instinct, like how you know where your kitchen light switch is, even in the dark. That's medieval time. It doesn't tick. It glows. And when it fades, your day ends. But what if the sun's not out? What if it's the dead of night, or a storm rolls in and smothers the light for hours? You need something else. Something that doesn't care about the weather or the stars. So you turn to time's quieter allies, water fire and slow, steady destruction. Picture a clay pot hanging from a wooden beam with a tiny hole near the bottom. Drop by drop, water seeps out. When the pot is empty or the water reaches a marked line, you know time has passed. It's called a clepsydra, or water clock, and yes, it's older than most medieval saints. In some monasteries, these clocks sat in corners, like trusted old dogs, quietly counting out the hours while everyone else prayed or slept. They weren't perfect. Too hot, and the water evaporated. Too cold, and it froze. But in temperate seasons, they offered something extraordinary, predictable passage. If you filled it to the top at midnight, you might know it's terse when it reached halfway. You didn't watch it obsessively. You just checked in when the rhythm of the day needed checking. Then there's fire, specifically candles, and oil lamps, both used not just for light, but for duration. Monks often marked their candles with lines. As the flame burned down to each notch, they could tell how much time had passed. One notch might equal an hour. Another might signal the end of a sermon. And if your candle burned faster than expected, well, either the wax was cheap or someone was sleeping on the job. A clever variant used metal pins stuck into the wax at intervals. As the flame reached each pin, it dropped noisily into a dish below. A gentle clink. A reminder that time had moved forward even if no one said a word. If you've ever used a kitchen timer that dings, you've felt the same satisfaction, though maybe with fewer dripping robes and melted fingertips. Of course, using fire as a timekeeper came with its own risks. You had to stay vigilant. A gust of wind could blow out your schedule. A curious mouse might chew through your precious candle stash. And nothing ruins a midnight prayer session like an accidental blaze in the nave. Still, these elemental clocks had a kind of poetry to them. They didn't just measure time, they performed it. The water fell. The flame sank. Time became something you could see, hear, and smell. The hiss of melting wax. The soft splash of overflow. You didn't need gears or glass. You had elements and patience. In wealthier households or ambitious abbeys, you might even find elaborate candle clocks with moving figures or bells that chimed as wax disappeared. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of novelty cuckoo clocks. A monk once designed a candle that rang a bell every hour as it burned. It was beautiful, clever, and utterly annoying if you were trying to get any sleep nearby. Even royalty got in on the flame game. King Alfred the Great of England in the 9th century famously used candles to divide his day into equal parts for prayer study and war planning. He'd burn 6 candles each lasting 4 hours to keep his routine on track. It worked at least well enough for him to defend the kingdom against Vikings. And while we're here, Ask yourself this: if your only way to know time was to watch a candle die, would you be more aware of it slipping away? Maybe you'd treasure your hours more if you could see them melting in front of you. Even today, we love candles for their ambience. But back then, they weren't just decoration. They were necessity. They kept monks on schedule, bakers from burning bread, and travelers from losing their path in the dark. And unlike the sun, they didn't take days off. Eventually, more precise mechanical clocks would eclipse these gentle glowing timers. But for centuries, fire and water held the line. They didn't chime. They didn't tick. They just vanished slowly and steadily, carrying your hours with them into the silence. Now imagine you're no longer on land at all. You're swaying on the creaking deck of a ship surrounded by salt air, wet ropes, and the groans of timber that sounds far too flexible for comfort. Welcome to medieval sea travel, where keeping time becomes both more urgent and far more ridiculous. You can't rely on the sun. The sky is either blinding cloudy or pitching sideways. You can't use bells, they'd be drowned by the crashing of waves. And if you tried candles or dripping water, good luck keeping a flame lit or anything level enough not to spill on the first swell. So, what do you turn to? Sand. The hourglass becomes your most trusted companion. A glass timer filled with fine sand, flipped regularly by a sailor with surprisingly good muscle memory. It's not fancy. It's not scientific, but it works even in stormy seas. And in a world where you need to calculate things like speed and watch shifts, the humble hourglass becomes king of time. Picture it: every 30 minutes, the glass is turned. This marks what's called a half watch. After 4 turns, 2 hours, you rotate the crew. Those on duty go below deck to collapse in hammocks or on wet boards. Those off duty come up to take over. This cycle continues endlessly, with sand as the heartbeat of the voyage. Did sailors love it? Not really, but they trusted it. The hourglass didn't lie. It didn't rust. And it wasn't prone to forgetting, unlike that one guy who always claimed it was totally his turn to sleep again. And you couldn't exactly ignore it either. Miss your turn, and the ship could drift, the sail might tear, or someone would definitely curse your name over grog. Interestingly, these hourglasses were often paired with another low-tech marvel, the log line. You'd throw a piece of wood tied to a knotted rope overboard and count how many knots slipped through your fingers in a set time, usually measured with that same hourglass. That's where the term knots as a measure of speed comes from. It was practical smart, and probably terrifying if you were the one holding the line on a windy day. The sea, more than any monastery or farm, demanded a kind of militant awareness of time. You didn't just pass the hours, you survived them. Miss one too many, and you could find yourself in the wrong waters, or worse, the wrong century, drifting endlessly because someone forgot to flip the sand. And it wasn't just for crew management. On trading ships or long voyages, knowing the time helped prevent starvation. If you could measure days accurately, you could ration food and water. Flip the glass and pass the bread someone might mumble, voice hoarse with salt. Timekeeping meant life. It wasn't romantic. It was survival. Strangely, the hourglass became such a symbol of precision that it started appearing in medieval paintings, often held by angels or death himself. Because, yes, time was always running out. And nothing illustrated that more clearly than watching it literally slip away grain by grain. Even modern sand timers used in board games or egg cooking owe their heritage to those sea-worn hourglasses. Every time you flip one, You're echoing a centuries-old habit marking time not with hands or ticks, but with something vanishing and irreversible. So, if you're ever on a ship and someone hands you a glass of sand to keep watch, don't laugh. Just flip it. Stare at the falling grains and listen to the ocean. Somewhere, a medieval sailor is nodding at you in solidarity, back on land, where the ground doesn't lurch beneath your feet and the smell of salt doesn't cling to everything. Timekeeping feels a little less life-threatening, but only a little, because in the middle of a bustling medieval town, you're not just listening for time, you're living inside it. And that means listening for the clang of the market bell and the voice of the town crier. Your day begins with noise. Not gentle, not subtle noise. The market bell rings, echoing between timber-framed houses and crooked alleys. It's not just telling merchants to open their stalls. It's telling everyone what time it is. Time to buy sell gossip and pretend your cabbages are fresher than they look. The bell is your morning alarm and your daily reminder that the local lord expects taxes on every loaf leg and lump of wool. And when there's news, real news, or at least loud news, that's when the town crier steps in. He's not just shouting for fun. He's the medieval newsletter, complete with dramatic delivery and a flair for repetition. He might yell that the Duke is raising a new tax, or that someone's being put in the stocks at noon. He might announce a feast day, or a funeral. Whatever it is, the crier delivers it in rhythm with the bell. Time in towns is public. You don't own a clock. No one does except maybe the church or the town hall. But it doesn't matter. You hear time. The bell tells you when to stop working, when to eat, when to go to mass, when to get inside before curfew, or else risk running into something worse than a thief, like a curfew enforcer with a stick and something to prove. And the bells have personalities. Some chime high and fast, cheerful, almost playful. Others toll low and slow, a kind of audible scowl. You learn their meanings. You know which one signals the closing of the gates, which one marks the execution square, and which one celebrates Saint whoever's feast day with a bit too much enthusiasm for your hangover. Now and then, a town gets fancy and installs a mechanical clock. These are rare, expensive, and often wildly inaccurate, but they're glorious. A large face painted on the wall of the town hall. Heavy weights turning gears behind wooden panels. Maybe even little figures that move when the hour strikes, a knight swinging a sword, or a monk banging a miniature bell. If you lived in a town like that, you'd probably brag about it. Our clock has a dancing dragon, you might say, sipping weak ale in the tavern. Theirs just has a boring angel. Because yes, timekeeping was civic pride. A well-made bell tower or clock could make your town feel more important, more central, more in control, which of course was often just an illusion, because even in cities, precision wasn't the goal. Participation was. When the bell rang, you moved. When the crier shouted, you listened. It didn't matter if the hour was a little off, as long as everyone agreed it was close enough. And what if you missed the bell, or lived too far to hear it clearly? Well then, you relied on the rhythm of the street, the smells of baking bread, the sound of shutters slamming open, the rush of people to the square. In a way, the whole town was your timepiece. Each person, a gear in a system that hummed, growled, and occasionally shouted. Ever tried to live without checking your phone for a day? You start looking for cues. What people are doing, how the light falls, the sound of traffic. That's medieval life. It's not silent or still. It's dynamic. Time is a social contract announced with iron and lungs, and despite all its chaos, it worked. The butcher didn't show up 3 hours late. The baker didn't forget to light the oven. Children played merchants, sold lovers, whispered all within a shared audible rhythm. Time wasn't private. It wasn't customizable. It belonged to the community. And it arrived every hour like a chorus of bells and a man with a loud voice reminding you that yes, it's time to get back to work. Outside the towns and far from the cathedral bells, you find yourself in the countryside, surrounded by fields, fences, and the distant lowing of cows. And here, time doesn't ring from a tower. It groans from your stomach. It clucks in the chicken coop. It begins not with a bell, but with a yawn. Welcome to rural timekeeping, where no one cares if it's exactly 6:00 a.m., because the only clock that matters is your body. You rise with the light, not with a chime. You eat when you're hungry, rest when your arms are sore, and go to sleep when your eyes start closing, regardless of what hour the stars say it is. Out here, the rooster is the closest thing you get to a timepiece, and even he's inconsistent. Some days, he crows before dawn, other times after. And yet somehow, you and every other farmhand still know when to get up. Maybe it's muscle memory. Maybe it's just the way the cold morning air slips under the straw roof and nudges your feet. You step outside and feel the sky. That's your first measurement. Is it blue? Is it pink? Are there long shadows stretching toward the barn? All of these tell you something about the hour. No dial, no chart, just lived experience, repeated over so many seasons that your brain starts measuring light like it measures hunger. Work itself becomes a kind of timekeeper. You plant until the sun rises over the elm. You reap until your shadow touches the fence post. You carry water until your back says enough. And when your stomach grumbles and the oxen start drooping their heads, you know it's time to break for food. This is gut clock time. Internal, intuitive, incredibly effective. And unlike mechanical clocks, it never breaks. Though it does complain when you skip lunch. And then there's the songs. On farms, labor wasn't silent. People sang, not just for joy, but for timing. Work songs kept rhythm, helping workers stay in sync, whether they were threshing wheat, stomping grapes, or spinning wool. A good work song didn't just make the hours pass, it measured them. One verse per motion. One chorus per row. Before you knew it, the sun had moved, and your job was halfway done. You didn't need to count hours. You counted baskets, filled furrows, dug cows milked. The passage of time was recorded not in minutes, but in accomplishments. When did you finish, someone might ask. Just before the sun hit the western hill, you'd reply. Or right after the second song. This kind of timekeeping also meant that your day changed with the seasons. Summer brought long stretches of daylight and endless tasks. Winter. The sun slept in, and so did you. There were fewer hours to farm and fewer reasons to rush. Time bent with the earth's tilt. It wasn't rigid, it breathed. And because nature was your clock, weather could throw it all into chaos. A foggy morning might trick you into oversleeping. A sudden frost might cut your harvest day short. But that was life. You adjusted. You adapted. You squinted at the sky and said, "Looks like we've got until the geese start flying," and that was enough. For people who worked with their hands, time was never about exactitude. It was about experience. You knew the pace of the plow. You felt the rhythm of the scythe. You didn't measure time so much as you lived inside it, The way a fish doesn't measure the water it swims in, it just swims. Want a modern analogy? Imagine cooking a meal without a timer. You don't set a clock, you just know when the onions are caramelized, when the pasta is done, when the bread smells ready. That's medieval rural time. It's culinary. It's seasonal. It's deeply human. So no, you don't need a bell or a candle. Just a strong back, a decent voice for singing, and a gut that reminds you when it's time for bread and cheese. And maybe a rooster. Though to be fair, he's mostly just there for dramatic effect. Every now and then, though you step out of the mud and straw and into a world of polished brass and velvet robes where time isn't guessed or sung or sniffed out by baking bread. It's calculated, precisely elegantly, and often unnecessarily. Welcome to the rarefied world of the astrolabe, the sundial, and the people who had enough money to pretend time belonged to them. You don't just stumble upon an astrolabe. It's handed to you by someone who uses words like ecliptic and zenith in casual conversation. It looks like a golden dinner plate, crossed with a star chart and a piece of mysterious clockwork. Spin it align the star pointers, and suddenly you know the time, the season, and maybe even what phase the moon is in. That is, if you know what you're doing. Most people don't. These tools were for the learned and the proud. Monks used them to track prayer hours with celestial backing. Islamic scholars whose advanced models influenced European designs mapped the heavens with them. Navigators could find their latitude, and noblemen could wave them around at dinner parties to look brilliant, even if they couldn't read half the symbols. Then there's the sundial, a more familiar face, though still a luxury in most places. Towns might install one on a church wall. Manors might have one nestled among the herb gardens. Some were portable, carved into ivory or brass, worn on belts like fancy time jewelry. But make no mistake, sundials were status symbols. If you had one, you weren't just telling time. You were owning it. The irony, they didn't work half the time. Cloud cover ruined everything. A misaligned base meant your noon was really 11ish. And in winter, the sun's low arc made the shadows stretch into nonsense. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that you looked like you had mastery over time, even if your peasants were still relying on the rooster and gut instinct. And speaking of luxury, let's not forget the human clock servants. In elite households, you didn't need to keep track of the hour. Someone else did it for you. A steward woke you. A bell was rung for meals. A secretary reminded you when it was time for audiences or prayers. Your time was choreographed down to the minute by others. A luxury, yes, but also a trap. If you couldn't even choose when to nap, were you really in control? But back to the devices. Astrolabes were astonishing feats of engineering. With dozens of rotating parts, they could calculate time by the stars. Sailors might have used them at sea if they could afford them. Scholars studied them for hours, tracing the paths of constellations like secret messages from God. Today we swipe right on a screen to check the hour. Back then they spun brass in candlelight and hoped their guesses were close enough. It's hard not to admire the beauty of it. These weren't just tools. They were art, engraved with sacred geometry, laced with silver. Some even featured inscriptions from poems or scripture. A sundial might say, "I count only the sunny hours." Poetic, a little smug, and entirely accurate. Want a comparison? Think of a luxury watch today. It tells time, but so does your phone. You wear the watch, not because you need it, but because it says something about who you are. That was the astrolabe. That was the sundial. Less about function, more about identity. And yet even the rich couldn't fully escape nature. Their sundials still depended on the sun. Their astrolabes still required a clear sky. Their servants still got sick. The illusion of control was strong, but fragile. So when you walk past a nobleman, squinting at a brass disc, while a page holds it up to the sun, remember he might look like a master of time, but the rooster back in the village still wakes up on schedule with no gears, no stars, and no applause. By now you've realized that medieval timekeeping wasn't a single system. It was a patchwork quilt of bell stars, gut instincts, and burning wax. But there's still one more layer stitched into that fabric, the calendar of saints and the moon. Because if you're trying to figure out what day it is, not just what hour, you don't look at your phone. You look at the sky. And the church. Let's start with saints. In a world where numbered months and weekdays haven't quite reached the fields and forests, time is divided by feasts. You don't say, let's meet on April 15th. You say, let's meet on the Monday after St. Dunstan's. Or maybe we'll harvest by the time St. Swithin's comes. These aren't just holy days, they're your time anchors. There are saints for every imaginable occasion. Saint Apollonia watches over teeth. Saint Isidore protects farmers. And Saint Agatha Well, let's just say she's invoked against fire and volcanic eruptions. Everyone has a patron. Everyone has a day. And in some parts of Europe, there were more than 200 feast days in a year. That's more than 200 chances to eat slightly better, dress a little fancier, and most importantly, mark the passage of time. You might even remember birthdays by their proximity to saints. My daughter was born a week before St. Margaret's. It's not precise, but it sticks in your mind better than a number, especially when few people can read or write anyway. Then there's the moon. In rural life, the moon is more than decoration. It's a calendar in the sky. Full moons meant visibility for night travel or harvests. New moons meant darkness and often rest. People marked their lives by moon cycles, planting, weaning, even brewing. If the moon was right, the time was right. Ever heard of harvest moon or wolf moon? Those aren't just poetic phrases, they're survival tools. A bright moon in September meant you could work into the evening during the most important time of year, and people knew them too. You might say, we'll finish thatching before the blood moon, and everyone would nod, understanding the urgency written in the sky. Now, if you're a little more scholarly, or just trying to impress someone, you might consult a lunar calendar, which monks and priests often maintained. These recorded not just the moon phases, but important feast dates, equinoxes, and eclipses. Some even included agricultural advice. Sow barley after the third full moon of Lent. It's not exactly Google Calendar, but it worked. And let's not pretend this was always smooth. Sometimes people got confused. The lunar calendar doesn't line up perfectly with the solar one. That's why Easter seems to move around like a traveling minstrel. It's based on the first Sunday, after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. Simple, not remotely, but sacred absolutely. These rhythms weren't just religious, they were relational. They tied people to each other, to the land, to the heavens. When everyone shares the same feast days, the same moon phases the same seasonal markers, there's a strange kind of unity. Even if you've never met the monk keeping time in the next village, you both know what it means when someone says, it's almost Michaelmas. And yes, there were arguments. One priest says St. Lucy's feast is the 13th. Another insists it's the 16th. Someone else swears it's the second Thursday after Advent begins. confused yet welcome to medieval scheduling. It was more flexible than you'd think, and occasionally dictated by local tradition more than the Pope. But maybe that was the point. Time in this world wasn't just mathematical. It was meaningful. Days weren't just days. They were holy. They were personal. A date carried the weight of a martyrdom, a miracle, a legend passed down by candlelight. So if you were waiting to get married, you didn't choose a random Tuesday. You chose the feast of Saint Valentine, or avoided the feast of Saint Lawrence, just in case the roasted martyrs vibes ruined your nuptials. And when you died, that too would be remembered by its date. Not a cold number, but a saint's name. She passed on the feast of Saint Bridget. It sounds softer, doesn't it? Like your life was folded into something bigger than arithmetic. Eventually, whether by bell shadow candle or Saint Your Day, winds down. You've prayed. You've worked. Maybe you've cursed the rooster once or twice. And now, as the sky deepens into blue and orange and finally black, you feel something no dial can mark. That invisible weight behind your eyes. That dull ache in your back. The slow, inevitable certainty that time is no longer outside you, it's inside. Your body knows. The day is done. There's no need for a clock to tell you this. You feel it in your legs, in the soot on your fingers, in the chill creeping through the walls. The sun's gone, the fire's low, and someone has stopped singing in the next field. You haven't seen a timepiece all day, but you felt time with every breath, with every task completed and every meal eaten. Time didn't tick, it pulsed. It weighed. It tugged at your limbs until you gave in. Even the animals sense it. Chickens roost. Dogs curl up in doorways. The goats go silent. You don't check the hour, you just know it's late because everything slows. There's a collective exhale that spreads from person to person, from house to house. A kind of medieval bedtime notification, delivered not through vibrations but through stillness. And what do you do with the last few moments of wakefulness? Maybe you mumble a prayer. Maybe you rearrange your straw mattress to avoid that one sharp stalk. Maybe you trace patterns on the wall with leftover candlelight until it gutters and snuffs itself out. However it ends, there's no countdown, no alarm. Just the dark folding over you like a blanket. The curious thing about medieval timekeeping is how little of it is about measuring and how much of it is about feeling. You're not chasing precision. You're riding a rhythm. Each hour isn't a cage, it's a tide, and you're floating in it whether you like it or not. There's a strange comfort in that. No pressure to maximize your day. No color-coded productivity charts. Just moments stacked like firewood morning chores, midday meals, afternoon repairs, evening warmth. No one's asking if you won the morning. You simply lived it. Even when mechanical clocks became more common, those towering, clanging beasts in town squares, they didn't erase the older rhythms. People still woke with the sun, still sang while they worked, still let their bodies announce when enough was enough. The clock might ring out the hour, but your muscles always knew better. You lie there maybe on a wooden board, maybe on straw, maybe under a wool blanket, so scratchy it feels like sleeping with a hedgehog. Your body hurts in familiar places. Your hands are stained with honest work, and your eyes, already half closed, scan the rafters above, as if they too remember the pattern of time. And here's the beautiful part. Despite the lack of clocks, despite the absence of precision, it all worked. People met. Crops were planted. Mass was held. children were born. Empires rose and fell. Time moved, not in digits, but in footsteps, prayers, chores, and shadows. So the next time you glance at your phone to check the time for the 5th time in an hour, ask yourself, do you really know what time it is? Or are you just watching numbers change? Because here in this quiet medieval night, there are no numbers, no screens, no ticking, just a deep, full silence. And the unshakable sense that the world has turned the day, has spoken, and you, without even realizing it, have listened. You've just wandered through a world without clocks, where time was told by bells, shadows, firelight, and the quiet pull of the moon. And yet somehow, everything still moved. Days passed. Lives unfolded. Not by the minute, but by feeling ritual and rhythm. In that world, you didn't chase time. You flowed with it. So as your own day winds down, let your body do the same. No alarms, no glowing screens. Just the steady hush of the past, reminding you it's enough. You've done what you could. The world will keep turning as it always has. Now close your eyes. Let the silence stretch and drift slowly into the kind of sleep only the timeless truly know. Good night